The Great Goldfish Escape. Growing up, my family was small but full of character. It was just me, my dad, and our goldfish, Captain Bubbles. Dad was a single parent, and he always tried to make life fun and interesting, even when things were tough. Captain Bubbles was our silent but steadfast companion, swimming in his little bowl on the kitchen counter. One evening, Dad decided we needed a break from our usual routine. "Let's have a camping trip," he declared. Since we couldn't afford a real trip, he set up a tent in our living room, complete with sleeping bags, flashlights, and a makeshift campfire made of construction paper and a flashlight. As we sat in our camp, roasting marshmallows over a candle, Dad started telling one of his infamous ghost stories. He had a talent for making them both spooky and funny, and I was on the edge of my sleeping bag, captivated. Just as he reached the climax of the story, we heard a splash from the kitchen. Dad and I exchanged glances. "Captain Bubbles!" we shouted in unison, scrambling out of the tent. We found our little fish flopping on the counter, having somehow managed to jump out of his bowl. In a panic, Dad grabbed the first thing he could find, a spaghetti strainer, and scooped up Captain Bubbles, depositing him back into his bowl. For a moment, we just stared at each other, then burst into laughter. "I guess he wanted to join the campfire, too," Dad said, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. We settled back into our tent, the ghost story forgotten, sharing stories about Captain Bubbles' adventurous spirit. Years passed, and our living room camping trips became a cherished tradition. But life has a way of throwing curveballs. When I was 14, Dad lost his job. The company downsized, and he was one of many who got the axe. He tried so hard to find work, but jobs were scarce, and money got tighter. Despite the financial strain, Dad never let go of his sense of humor. He turned our budgeting sessions into games, making it a challenge to see how much we could save. We learned to appreciate the little things, finding joy in each other's company and the simple pleasures of life. One particularly rough winter, we couldn't afford to keep the heat on all the time. Dad turned it into another adventure, calling it the Arctic Expedition. We bundled up in layers of clothes, built blanket forts, and pretended we were explorers braving the elements. Captain Bubbles got his own little fort, made from a shoebox and some old scarves. It was during that winter that Captain Bubbles finally reached the end of his adventurous life. We found him one morning, floating peacefully in his bowl. Dad tried to cheer me up with jokes about Captain Bubbles' final great escape, but I could see the sadness in his eyes, too. We gave our little fish a proper send-off, complete with a tiny fish-sized boat made from a matchbox. After Captain Bubbles' passing, things slowly got better. Dad eventually found a job, and while we still faced challenges, we faced them together. We continued our living room camping trips, always leaving a little space in our makeshift campsite for our adventurous fish. Now, years later, I look back on those times with a mix of laughter and tears. Dad and I still joke about Captain Bubbles and his daring escape attempts, but there's a bittersweet tinge to the memories. Life wasn't easy, but we had each other, and we had the ability to find joy and humor even in the toughest times. And that, I think, is the greatest legacy my dad could have given me. Leave a like and write your story in the comments.